You had food on the table. You had clothes. You had a roof. Maybe you even had parents who said they loved you. Hmm. And yet, somewhere deep inside, there's this feeling you've never quite been able to explain. Like something is missing. Not something you lost. Something that was never there to begin with. And the strange part? You can't point to it. There's no dramatic story, no obvious wound, no moment you can go back to and say, that's where it started. That's exactly what makes this so hard to see and so hard to heal. Today we're going to talk about something that affects nearly 1 in 5 adults worldwide, and most of them have absolutely no idea it shaped them. It's not abuse. It's not trauma in the way people usually imagine trauma. It's something quieter, something invisible, something that psychologists call childhood emotional neglect. And before you think, that doesn't apply to me, stay with me for a second, because the people who most need to hear this are usually the ones most convinced they don't. I'm Berg, from Blue Money Mind, and if you're someone who likes content that actually goes somewhere real, hit subscribe, because that's what we do here. Let me ask you something. When you were a child, and you were scared, or sad, or confused, what happened? Not what you were told would happen. What actually happened? Did someone sit with you in that feeling? Did someone name it for you? Did someone say, I see you're hurting, and that makes sense? Oh, for a lot of people, the honest answer is no. Not because their parents were monsters, but because their parents simply didn't go there. They were distracted, or overwhelmed, or they themselves had never been taught how. And so the child learned very quietly, very efficiently, that emotions were not something to be shared. They were something to be managed alone. That child grew into you. Here's the thing that makes childhood emotional neglect so different from other kinds of pain. It isn't defined by what happened. It's defined by what didn't. Psychologist Jonas Webb, who spent years researching this, describes it as a parent's failure to act enough. Not a parent who screamed, not a parent who hit, a parent who simply didn't respond, didn't notice, didn't validate. And because there's no event to point to, most people who carry this never connect it to anything. They just think they're broken in some quiet, nameless way. They think something is wrong with them, when actually, something was missing for them. This is the first reframe. The wound of absence is still a wound. It just doesn't leave a visible scar. And the cruelest part of it is this. The people who experienced emotional neglect as children are often the last ones to recognize it. Because when your emotions were consistently ignored or dismissed when you were young, you learned to do the same thing to yourself. You became very good at functioning. Maybe even excellent at it. You showed up. You performed. You took care of things. You helped others. You kept moving. And somewhere along the way, you stopped noticing that you were running on empty. You stopped noticing that you were running on empty. That beneath the productivity and the competence and the self-sufficiency, there was this quiet, persistent hollowness that never quite went away. That hollowness has a name. Research shows that children who don't receive enough emotional responsiveness from caregivers develop what's called an underdeveloped stress response system. In plain terms, their nervous system never learned how to regulate itself properly because it was never co-regulated by a present, attuned adult. And this creates a cascade of effects that follows them into adulthood. Higher rates of anxiety, higher rates of depression, difficulty with impulse control, a persistent sense that they are, in some fundamental way, not enough. But here's where it gets even more interesting, and a little strange. Many adults who were emotionally neglected as children develop what researchers call alexithymia. Don't worry about the word. What it means is this. They feel physical sensations, but they can't attach emotions to them. Their chest gets tight, but they don't know they're anxious. Their stomach drops, but they don't know they're afraid. They go numb in situations that should feel painful, and they feel nothing in situations that should feel joyful. And this isn't because they're cold people. It's because, as children, Their emotional experiences were consistently unacknowledged. The brain adapted. It learned to process feelings physically, but never emotionally, because no one ever helped them make that connection. The emotional language simply was never installed. Oh, and then they grow up wondering why they feel so disconnected. Now, and this is important, none of this means their parents didn't love them. That's the nuance that gets lost constantly in conversations like this. Emotional neglect in the overwhelming majority of cases is not intentional. It's not malicious. Parents who were emotionally unavailable were often that way because they themselves grew up in homes where emotions were ignored. They gave what they had. They just didn't have enough of what their child actually needed. Research has even shown that this pattern can transmit across multiple generations. Grandparents who were neglected, raising parents who then emotionally neglect their own children, not out of cruelty, but out of a blind spot so deep they didn't even know it was there. Culture plays a role too. In many families and communities, emotional restraint is taught as strength. Boys are told not to cry. Girls are told to be pleasant and accommodating. Families under financial stress, families dealing with immigration, families navigating trauma, they often don't have the emotional bandwidth to attune to a child's inner world. And so the neglect happens, quietly, without intention, but with consequences that are very, very real. So, what does this actually look like in an adult's life? Because this is where it gets personal. It looks like someone who is incredibly capable of taking care of others, but genuinely doesn't know how to receive care. It looks like someone who feels vaguely guilty whenever they have a need, like needing something is an inconvenience, a weakness, a burden. It looks like someone who gets close to people, but always keeps a door open to leave, who loves, but from a slight distance, who is present in the room, but somewhere else inside. It looks like perfectionism that's never about excellence. It's about earning the right to exist. It looks like people-pleasing that's never about generosity. It's about survival, about making yourself small enough, useful enough, easy enough, so that this time, maybe, someone will stay. And underneath all of that, a core belief that is so old and so quiet that most people don't even hear it anymore. The belief that their emotions don't matter, that their needs are too much, that they are, fundamentally, too much. Oh, this is what childhood emotional neglect installs in a person, not a memory, a blueprint. But here is the part that changes everything. The brain is not fixed. Neuroscience has consistently shown that the pathways shaped by emotional deprivation in childhood can be rebuilt, not easily, not quickly, but genuinely. The healing from this kind of wound doesn't follow the same road as healing from a specific trauma. There's no single memory to process. What there is a grief. A grief for what was never there, for the comfort that never came, for the attunement that never formed, for the thousands of ordinary moments where a child reached out not necessarily with words, but with a feeling, a look, a small moment of need, and no one reached back. Grieving an absence is one of the hardest things a person can do, because the mind keeps asking, but what exactly are you mourning? There's no event, no villain, no clear wound. Just a shape, the shape of everything that should have been there and wasn't. And yet, naming that shape is exactly what begins to change it. Because when you stop dismissing your own emotional experience, when you start treating your feelings as real, as valid, as worth paying attention to, you are doing for yourself, finally, what was never done for you when it mattered most. That's not self-help language. That's neuroscience. That's the brain rebuilding pathways it never had the chance to build. Slowly. In therapy, in honest relationships, in the quiet practice of noticing what you feel instead of overriding it. Not dramatic, but real. Here's what I want you to take from this. You can be loved and still be emotionally starved. You can grow up in a house with no visible wounds. and still carry invisible ones. The people who struggle most with this aren't the ones with dramatic stories. They're the ones who look at their childhood and think, it wasn't that bad. And maybe it wasn't. But maybe what it was quiet and empty in a very specific way. And that emptiness shaped more than you've ever allowed yourself to admit. Oh, this isn't about blame. It's not about going back and pointing fingers at parents who were doing their best with what they had. It's about understanding yourself with more precision. It's about realizing that the pattern you've been living, the numbness, the self-sufficiency, the hunger for connection, that you immediately suppress it, didn't come from nowhere. It came from somewhere very specific. And when you understand where something comes from, you get to decide whether you want to keep living it. That's the difference between a pattern and a choice. If this video put words to something you've felt for a long time, but could never quite name, that's not a coincidence. That's recognition. And if you want more of this kind of content, real, honest, psychologically grounded, subscribe to Blue Money Mind. We go into these places that most channels don't. And if what you just heard resonates, drop a comment. Tell me, did you grow up in a house that looked fine on the outside? I genuinely like to know.